Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime and this is Wise Girl. It is the week of June 18th and we are pretty much into summer here in New York City, but I am joined today with a very special guest from Michigan. We're having outer staters come in to the fold here. He's the editor-in-chief of Stand magazine, and Dwayne D. Hayes is a formal social worker. He's worked in publishing for nearly 20 years and founded the literary magazine Absinthe, and he founded and directs the Greater Farmington Film Festival. And he started Stand magazine, the magazine for men who give a damn, which I love. Stand magazine takes a stand for a balanced and wholehearted masculinity that embraces the expression of emotion as strength. I'm going to repeat that. A wholehearted masculinity that embraces the expression of emotion as strength, promotes a healthy body, mind, and spirit, appreciates style and good humor, and seeks to shape a world of peace for all. It's a print magazine published quarterly. And Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us here today on Wise Girl. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So much fun. And I'm thrilled that you're doing this. You're a former social worker. What made you want to start and you're obviously married, you got a couple of kids, you said, you got a full life. What made you want to start this magazine?
Well, I'd been in publishing for years, and I love magazines. I'm the kind of guy who's just always at the magazine rack whenever I'm at a bookstore. When I'm out of town, I love to check out magazines. Always loved men's magazines, GQ and Esquire and all the others. And, I just felt like there was never a men's magazine that really was consistently encouraging men to be their best selves. You have magazines that are focused maybe on men's health and fitness, and they cover primarily the physical aspects of things. There's, other magazines that have other, specific kind of focuses, but there wasn't anything that kind of took a holistic view of, what does it mean to be a man who wants to live more ethically and intentionally in their life. And I resisted the magazine for many years. I had the idea, resisted it for many years because I realized I'm far from, I don't want to set myself up as the perfect guy, because I'm far from it. So it wasn't something I wanted to do, but it just kept tugging at me. So it seemed to be the right time to do it.
Yeah, it really, I think, is a perfect time for it because now that we're almost a year into Me Too time's up and, all of that, I think it's really amazing because as I was just mentioning offline before we got on the call, I've been trying to put together an online class for folks about toxic, masculinity or patriarchy or just sort of like what you're doing digitally right now. So this is a great way to start.
That sounds great.
So talk to me about this business of living ethically, because we know there's a lot of emphasis on, like you said, physical, even sexual, that kind of thing. But living ethically, and you said in here, wholehearted masculinity that embraces the expression of emotion as strength. What does that mean?
Well, in my life, I've experienced being ashamed of emotions and feeling like expressing my emotions or being in touch with my emotions was, that was girly. That was for women. That wasn't something that men do. And so a lot of times we're excluding a huge part of who we are as human beings when we're doing that and pushing that down. And, a message that we often share with boys is, if you're expressing your emotions, if you're crying, if you're being too intimate with your male friends, then somehow you're less of a man, or you're not going to grow up to be manly enough or man enough. And we see the damage that's doing to a lot of us. And frankly, I was on a path to being pretty self-destructive and harming and hurting people around me, and being a lonely old guy. And so it's just critical that we understand holistically who we are and embrace that and make changes in our life.
I love that. As I was mentioning again offline before we started, Terry Real introduced me to the work of not only his work, but Carol Gilligan and, other folks before him, and Michael Kimmel, who I had interviewed here on Wise Girl, and who you said is an advisor to Stand Magazine, which is great, the chair of the Center for Men and Masculinities over at Stony Brook, the founder of that. Talk to me about this business of cutting off emotionally versus, being part of this full range of human experience, because Gilligan, I think, is the one who said women lose their voices, men lose their hearts, something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I've told this story recently at a father's conference I was at, but when I was a boy, I loved to I would laugh until I cried, and I was easily brought to tears for something funny would move me to tears, something sad would move me to tears, and I quickly learned that was not cool. I would get ridiculed and laughed at if I did that, and we developed these patterns of just shutting it down. A few years ago, it's been almost what has it been, 7 years almost, that my wife and I lost twin daughters that were stillborn at 36 weeks. And it was just devastating, to say the least. And
Sorry to hear that.
I had an incredibly difficult time expressing how I felt, understanding how I felt, and just really wanted to forget it and shove those feelings down. But of course, they come out in other ways, and they come out in ways that are often destructive. And we do destructive things to try to mask those and hide those, whether it's drinking or other things that we do. So
yeah, I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that, and
thank you.
Really just want to make a little bit of space for that, because I think it really does connect us to the whole range of human experience, which includes gain and loss.
Right.
And then, of course, coming from this sort of other perspective that informs some of my work, which is this more Buddhist perspective, which kind of is just a set of teachings I find to say, how can we learn to relate to the realities of life with an ability to surf those waves of up and down, as opposed to just trying to make the pain go away by numbing out somehow, either erupting in rage or, gambling or sex or drinking or whatever that we do to kind of numb out. How do you then take that essence of the conversation, stepping into emotion, giving men a space to step into that full range of human experience in this magazine, Stand?
Well, I think it's, as I said, it's very important that we give guys opportunities to have these conversations. And so we're open about grief. We're open about giving voice to men who are experiencing that. We had Josh Levs, a writer, wrote about male body image issues and struggles with that. So we provide a space for men to talk about things that often aren't talked about and discussed. And not only do we do that in print, but we also have what we call the Standcast, our weekly podcast where we talk about these issues. Sometimes that's me talking to some other guys, or other times it's me just doing one-on-one interviews with people on some more specific kinds of topics. But just really trying to make a space within our website, within the magazine, within other things that we're doing to talk about these things that are incredibly difficult. I mentioned this Father's Conference I was at. One of the main sessions that we did was titled "Breaking the Silence" and men on depression and suicide. And we had a panel of men talking about their experience dealing with depression, and men just don't do that very well. So it's just critical to have these kinds of conversations and to do it in a variety of ways.
Right, and to do it in a way that gives people affirmation as opposed to this sort of sense of isolation. And I think what often inevitably comes with a lot of folks, men in particular, although it can happen with anyone, with women, is just a sense of shame, like I shouldn't feel this way, or what's wrong with me that I feel this way, or why can't I get over this or feel different about it, or why can't I be the guy who is the tech CEO or the head of the football team, or do whatever it is that I think I'm supposed to do, which is, be a man,
Exactly.
whatever that means, right?
Right. Yeah, I shared a story about kind of about my depression, and it took me a long time to understand that I was dealing with depression. I denied it for years and years and thought, oh, it's just, I'm in a job I don't like. I feel depressed. I'm going through a divorce. I'm depressed. I just wanted to attribute it to life events and forget it and not think that it was any real sense of depression, and that there was some biological aspect to it. And I shared at this conference on this panel that several times a year I wake up completely out of the blue. I can have had a great day the day before, and the first thing I think of, I wake up and I think, I just want to die. And it was the first time I said it out loud in front of other people, and it was really daunting, but it was really helpful for me to verbalize that and just share that's how I experience it.
And one of the things that Michael Kimmel, I mentioned earlier, that talks about in his books is the high rate of suicide amongst the farmers that were in, rural America, dating back, I don't know, at this point, 20 or 30 years, I guess. And how, based on a variety of factors, they just didn't feel like there was any out. There wasn't any way to talk about anything. There wasn't any way to get help. And so that was their action at the time. And I also heard Michael say that the real sort of antidote to a lot of this is more prosocial, men talking to men about issues and not having it be weird, right? Whatever that would mean for guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I did a few years ago after we lost the twins, and I was in the negative way that I was handling the situation, I had brought about, a point into my marriage where it was ready to implode. And I got into therapy. My wife got into therapy. We began to talk these out, but I realized that I needed men to talk to. I needed men to become friends with, or I was just going to be this isolated guy who has no friends. And I started, my son at that point was just going into kindergarten. And I realized that I live in a small town, and I realized I was walking by a bunch of guys with their kids, running into them at school. And so I started a monthly meetup at a new brewery that we have in town. And we've been going where it's 3 years strong now. We meet monthly. There's 12 to 20 guys that show up, and we don't always talk about deep issues. I mean, sometimes the conversation doesn't get much beyond the beer that guys are drinking. But there's those relationships begin to develop outside that as well. And guys invite each other over to their house or go see a movie or hang out elsewhere. And, it just takes making the effort to do that. And it makes all the difference.
Makes all the difference. And, you've worked through so much of that, and yet, which is so admirable, by getting help and by being transparent with your wife and, all of that. And then mentioning the group thing, I think a lot of it is that we're holding space together when we don't feel so alone. We realize that, this is something that it's a relational disease. It's a disease of isolation or of lack of sort of connection. And it's really not the truth of our lives. It's not really the truth of how things are. And so we're like, of course we're going to be miserable because we're trying to deny the truth of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Spoken like someone influenced by Buddhist thought. I love that.
Okay, I don't know.
Interconnectedness. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, just in the sense that research has shown again and again that sustainable happiness or well-being this is just scientific research, it is actually helped by the fact that people spend time together in groups. That
Mhm.
you can't just heal in isolation. You may need to do some work on your own, but that it's kind of a both and sort of phenomenon. So
Absolutely.
let's go back to the magazine itself and how this is creating perhaps a new way of conversation around, guys being able to access these other parts of themselves that, as a friend of mine said recently, who had become alcoholic, but who's been in recovery for a couple of years, I was taught to just put some dirt on it.
Yeah.
Got a problem? Put some dirt on it.
Yeah.
And
Sounds like what we tell kids all the time when they get injured on the ball field, right?
right. So, so you have these online communities, you have the actual magazine itself. Are there ways in which people in different communities, like you did with your brewery, are getting together live? Or is this something where there's online communities? Or, I mean, right now you're doing an online fundraising campaign to keep it going and get people can subscribe right now.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we do want to do the monthly event that I started for the dads, we call that Thursdads Night Out. And we would like to see that expand across the country and are inviting guys to get in touch with us about starting it. It's really been an amazing experience for me in that I put it off for months. When I had the idea, I thought, well, who's going to show up? Who's really going to come to something? And I also thought that I would be sitting there the first night, one, waiting for guys to show up, or two, one guy shows up and maybe we're totally different and don't have anything to talk about and it's completely awkward. But we had about 10 guys show up the first night, and each month, some guy will come up to me afterward and thank me for doing it. The guys are waiting for an opportunity to get together and have these kinds of conversations and meet and talk. And if there's someone listening who is interested in starting something, I'd be happy to, I'd love to talk with them about ideas and how to develop it and do it. But there are a lot of other organizations that are doing great things. The City Dads Group is, I believe, based in New York. They have groups that meet all across the country, and have dads that are doing things. Those are geared primarily towards fathers, but there are all kinds of other men's groups out there. If people, make the effort, they're going to find it. And if you can't find it, start your own, because you'll find guys interested.
That's great. That's a great invitation from you, but also just to, nowadays with technology, people can do a lot of stuff in terms of getting the word out, like you said, with meetups. There's a couple things I want to ask about. I want to circle back to the Me Too Time's Up thing in a second. Okay. But the one of the things that I think it was Michael who brought this up, maybe it was Terry, I don't know, but that men, okay, so I'll do it from the women's perspective. Women think they dress for other women half the time, right? Like, do I have the right pocketbook? Do I have the right shoes? That whole thing. It's like we're trying to compete with other women, really. Like, guys couldn't care less half the time, in some ways. They either like you or they don't, so to speak, right? And then, women are always sizing each other up. And in much the same way, or so it's said at some point. I'm not... it's not always this way. Right. And so it said that with men, that the man is more afraid of his guy friends not accepting him if he stands up for something that he sees that's happening that he doesn't believe in. For example, the way another man is treating a woman, either, whether it's harassment or something else. And that it's the fear of getting cut off from that group of guys, whoever your, cadre is, your tribe, or whatever, could be a fraternity or whatever. And so that dynamic is what perpetuates the silence sometimes of otherwise well-intentioned guys who don't want to lose or be abandoned or rejected by this group of guys that is not really in favor of opening up to this full range of human experience that you're talking about. Can you talk about that dynamic and how that's played out in your life, or how you've seen it played out in other guys' lives who've talked to you?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's something that I've heard Tony Porter from A Cult of Men. Are you familiar with The Cult of Men, that organization? The great organization. And Tony Porter, who's the CEO of the organization, has often said, it's the real tragedy in these situations is that the good men are silent and haven't spoken up or said anything. In my life, I've seen that happen a lot because guys, when you get a group of guys around, that dynamic that you described is absolutely at play. I see it in such benign situations, like, I'm a vegetarian, so there's this whole aspect of guys got to eat meat, and I'll get ribbed by guys, no pun intended. I'll get ribbed by guys about that I'm not eating meats, and that what am I gonna grill when we're grilling out and things like that. And so to know that you're gonna get bothered by guys for something as benign as that, when you stand up and say, hey, don't diminish women in this way, or they say something sexist or crude, it's very hard to make that step and to take a stand and say something. And so we need to find ways to make it safer for guys to feel comfortable to do that. But we have to, we just have to change that conversation. We have to make it something that we do talk about. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the magazine as well, is open up that conversation and provide another, another way that media operates and handles that relationship, or those relationships between men and women, and shows a different aspect to it. I love, as I mentioned, I love magazines, and I don't want to disparage any other magazines, but even a great magazine like Esquire last fall, we're in the midst of Me Too, and they come out with a special issue focused on the like 10 cars you have to have. And I don't know if you read Esquire, saw that issue, but each car was literally adorned and ornamented by a woman. And I was just amazed that they, at this point in their great history, would still objectify a woman in that way and use them to adorn a car. I mean, you expect it from some other car magazines, but not really. I wouldn't have expected that from Esquire. So it's important to have alternatives of how these relationships need to go, and how men need to see women and talk to women and talk about women, especially among themselves. So
yeah,
I think that was a rambling answer. I don't know.
No. I mean, I think as you're saying that last part of it, with the cars and the images, I'm thinking of two things. One was the Matt Lauer thing, and there was a big article about it. And then, those pop-up ads come up, and it was some woman in a bathing suit, like hiking up her thing to her, like whatever. And I was like, this is not the ad I want to be seeing next to this story about, Matt Lauer. Right. Yeah. And then I was thinking about a personal experience that I had earlier this year with someone who actually, won a very laudable prize as a journalist for doing work on the Me Too stuff, and had made an unwanted sexual advance in my direction. And, sort of was like, oh, I guess I have a lot to learn. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah. And why am I the one who has to kind of be the one to be dealing with this with you right now? Because really? Right. So it's very kind of slow going, but I think one person at a time. You said that the business of Me Too and Time's Up, in terms of Esquire, that they were sort of tone deaf, but also I think with the idea of men around the water cooler, sort of having a need to still stay safe at their work environment or keep their job because they want to feed their family. They don't want to get ostracized or somehow put themselves in a position where they aren't one of the guys, and yet they do need to stand up. I mean, again, the name of your magazine, Stand. Right. But I feel like unless they're resourced somehow deeper within themselves, you might call it integrity, you might call it character, you might call it virtue, you might have a spiritual connection, I don't know, that it's going to be real hard to convince someone what to say, when to act, what to do with a certain amount of integrity that's helpful, that they're not threatened by this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Well, it has to, these opportunities have to happen across life. It can't just be isolated and you only hear about this in one small place. It has to take place. Those conversations and discussions have to be taking place in the workplace. They have to be part of new employee training. They have to be part of what goes on in our schools. They have to be what goes on when you're in college, certainly much earlier than that. And it has to take place in churches, wherever we're engaged in relationship with people, and clearly our media, our music, our movies, all of these things impact who we are. And it kind of goes back to what I'm saying about the focus of Stand being to encourage men to think more intentionally about their lives and the messages that they get and where they get them, and how they incorporate those messages into their lives. We can't simply expect that this that one point in time is going to change everything. I had a conversation with Asha Daya, who founded a website Girl Talk HQ. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and with what she's doing. And we talked a little bit about if she's optimistic that this is going to bring lasting change, or if this is just a one time, and then we'll move on to something else within a few more months. But it's something we constantly have to keep talking about and engaging in various aspects of our lives.
Well, there's patriarchy, there's masculinity and toxic masculinity, and then there's like this relational field of intimacy. So there's the personal, and there's the political. There's kind of both, right?
Yeah.
And so working at it from these different angles in terms of how, I think it was Cornel West that said, justice is what love looks like in public or something. And in that way, it's like we might treat our wives well, or our sisters or our moms, but then like not really treat, other folks out there who aren't related to us, for example, that well. Or we may not treat people in our intimate circles very well. But I feel like oftentimes that has to do with one's own pain inside, that oftentimes when you speak of things like depression isn't acknowledged or even aware. Like the person isn't even aware that I'm depressed. Like this is a thing. Like it's not just me, or it's
Absolutely.
not.
Yeah.
So where does that come in? Because you had a big trauma in your life that made that sort of like, I got to deal with this. But for folks who are sort of on the dysthymia, I think they call it in psychological terms, that low level, depression, and they have alexithymia. They don't even know how to use words to do interoceptive awareness. What am I feeling? They're like, huh? There are words for this? Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Yeah. Where does somebody start?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say because it took the trauma for me, and you don't want to wish it, but we're all going to have those times in our life where things are where something awful happens to us, and it's what we do with them when they happen. I don't know. It's very difficult to suggest what someone else should do or can do in those situations. And, you look at the world and some people seem to have a greater capacity to do that sort of inward looking and searching, and others don't. I mean, we're all, the older I get, the more I'm appreciative of our diversity and how different we are, and not trying to pin everything on everybody and think that everybody has to behave in a particular way or think in a different in the right way, and so it's just incredibly difficult work that we have to create an openness to having these conversations, and an openness, particularly I think for boys who don't, with that being Stan's focus, who really are not encouraged to have these kinds of conversations, and not encouraged to think of themselves in in particular ways. You know, I was thinking about it the other day and putting together a list of qualities and characteristics that a lot of times we don't think about as being manly, or that we don't think we're man enough if we have these qualities. And that, you know, it's just got to change.
Like what?
Oh, just a guy who's gentle, a guy who's maybe meek, a guy who is unathletic, a guy who doesn't enjoy hunting or fishing or doing, you know, there's a whole range of things. You know, when I grew up, before things, before our thinking changed, you know, it was, you're gay if you seem to be not manly enough, and so there's just all kinds of messages that we give along the way that are telling young men, boys, that you're not good enough being a man, when it's ridiculous. You can be a man and have those qualities, and by restricting our manhood to some limited you know, qualities, we're really restricting our humanity and making it very difficult for us to have open relationships and healthy lives. So
Yeah, I love that, and healthy lives, because I think that the research has shown, Terry Real says that men who are more in the equality train, able to be more intimate, just report better marriages, better happiness, better satisfaction, better lives in general. Like, they're not caving into what their wife wants. They're just living a life that's more enjoyable for them because there's more harmony in it. It's not like my way or the highway, as one of my old bosses told me once.
Yeah, nice.
I know, kind of reminiscent of my father, actually, which was like, oh God. But more like, you know, let's work on this in a way that works for both of us, because then it's actually more harmonious, right? It doesn't have to be either or binary. But you mentioned something that I wanted to talk about you know, you said, oh, in the past, before we were, you know, more inclusive or evolved or whatever, we would be told we were gay. And so talk about how this applies to folks on the gender and sexuality spectrum in terms of where you see the conversation around masculinity applying to folks who have different orientations or identifications.
Yeah, you know, that is a key aspect to it, and this thinking that this you know, thinking that hopefully is changing. You know, I'd like to think that it's changing, that you know, men who are gay, transgender, that they are less than what a man is. Hopefully some of that's changing, and it really requires dialogue. It requires us to have these conversations. And, you know, growing up, I didn't, you know, I grew up in a very conservative religious home, and I didn't know someone who was gay, or at least if I did, they were closeted at the time. And so it wasn't until I got older, got into college, and began to meet gay men and have conversations and understand homosexuality, and, you know, go to social work school, be a social worker, do some different things. And we're just so isolated now that we're not interacting with someone who has a different experience or has grown up a little bit differently than we are. There's room for all of us to love each other and get along, and that aspect is huge. In fact, the next issue of the magazine is focused on sports, and I don't want to give too much away, but we have a really great interview with an ex-NFL football player who came out, I believe he came out after his career, that he was gay, and he's been very involved in the LGBTQ community since then, and working with, he still works with the NFL on that. So it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing. And I think that, you know, it sort of puts into question, like, what is masculinity, right? Or are we not talking about toxic masculinity, right? And what's toxic about what is toxic about toxic masculinity? And I think a lot of it is bullying, right? That idea of it's power over as opposed to power with. I think it was Gloria Steinem who said to me, we're linked, we're not ranked. And that very fundamental, shift is like, if I'm trying to be on top all the time, then somebody's got to be on the bottom that I'm, excluding or saying is less than me. And I derive my value and worth from being better than you. And that's kind of what bullying is, I think, fundamentally about.
Well, that when you go back to what you said before about some of the qualities that that men and boys have or are told that these aren't appropriate. Men have to be in control. Men have to be right. We have all these stereotypes of men not asking for directions, right? And there's a reason for that. So to always have to be right about what our limited view of masculinity is, I think that limitation turns into a toxicity for ourselves, and then spreads, unfortunately, in our relationships with our families and in our community. And we see it in so many other ways with bullying and school shootings and different things that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and I want to keep going back to this idea of, I think people are in pain, right? Like,
absolutely.
I don't think anybody who, as much compassion as I have, which is huge for anyone who's a victim of any kind of harassment or a shooting or anything, that somebody really, really has to be fundamentally unwell at a certain level to take on that kind of an action. That's just, it can't be a pleasant place to be in either. And so finding a way so that can be relieved, so that there isn't the perpetuation of these awful actions that impact communities and the world at large, I think is really deep work. And along those lines, how does this play out in terms of race? And we talked about sort of the gender sexuality spectrum with masculinity, but does this apply differently, or how does this manifest perhaps differently among different ethnic groups, whether it's, African American or Southeast Asian or anything that, we have I'm talking about here in the US mainly, obviously, or also, in addition to the race, different ages. Are boomers different than millennials, different than alphas?
Yeah. These are all things that, to be honest with you, we have so much work to do, and we've not done it well. The other thing that we haven't done, when I think about particularly what we're doing with Stand Magazine, is are we giving voice to women? Are we giving enough voice to minorities? We talked about sexuality. Are we handling that appropriately? I wouldn't want to come across and set ourselves up as that we have, we're still working on these relationships. We posted something on Facebook just the other day that had some information about the magazine, and the guy responded and said, "I don't see any black men on here. I'm not interested." And he was right. And I said to him, "You're right. We need to do a better job. What ideas do you have? What suggestions do you have?" It's really important for us to try to be humble and recognize that we don't know everything. We don't know what everybody's experience is. We don't know what it's like I don't know what it's like to be a black man. I've spent a lot of time over the last, particularly over the last year, reading a number of books by black men, so that I can hopefully gain a little bit better understanding. But I have a lot of work to do. I have a lot of work to do with what we're doing in the magazine, and I think one of the important things, again, going back to what men don't do well, or many men don't seem to do well, is humility. I've not been humble and understood what I don't need to know, and reached out to learn those things. So I have a lot to learn about all of these things, and
But you're open to hearing about it.
I'm trying to be open to it. Yeah, you think that you're open to it, but then are you really? I did a going back to the Me Too stuff. When I did a mini kind of, I do what I call mini standcasts from time to time, and I did this one episode where that's called Confessions of a Recovering Womanizer, because I realized that one of through therapy and through the experiences of almost imploding my marriage, I realized that one of my strategies of dealing with pain was to develop flirtatious relationships with other women, and that would, I'd feel good if I had some sort of, interaction with someone. And, it's incredibly difficult to admit that about yourself and to go, whoa, this is where I'm at in life. To know that I'm likely to fail at some point. It's not that I'm, by acknowledging it and understanding it, that I'm completely perfect now and will never say something that I wish I hadn't said, or think something I wish I hadn't thought. But trying to be.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's hard work. It's vulnerable and it's difficult.
Hard work, vulnerable, difficult, requires a certain degree of humility, but that's really honest. And I mean, we are human, we're not automatons, and we all have work to do. And I think that the fact that you're putting it out there and sharing your own personal story in that way is helpful, just because it normalizes it. I mean, it makes it clear that, I always say we go back to our conditioning and our programming, and, regardless of whatever it is that we may have in our conditioning and our programming, if we bring awareness to it, if we actually wake up and we have an intention toward making it not just be that repetitive habit pattern that we were programmed with, then we're going to at least orient in the right direction, right? We may not be perfect about it. It's always going to have a pull because it's been reified for X number of years, but that we're now at least trying to see more clearly, and we're less reactive and more responsive and show up in that way. Because I think that objectification and that othering, it happens with women, it happens with it happens with a million things. It happens with race, it happens with different abilities of people. I'm not that, or I want that, or I want to conquer that, or I want to own that. I mean, even the porn language, I want to smash that. Yeah. I'm like, whoa, that's even the tip of the iceberg on that. Talk about that in terms of where you see porn, for example, influencing this conversation, because it's right up there with Me Too in terms of what grabs people's attention in terms of the media.
Yeah, we're going to devote an issue to porn. One of the things that I haven't mentioned is we tend to take an issue and devote an issue to a particular topic. So our last issue was actually focused on Me Too. And we, as I mentioned before, we did an issue on body image. So we have an issue that we're in the early stages of developing on porn. And it's just huge in terms of its impact and the way we're thinking, and the way we approach our relationships, and particularly as younger people. I was on Twitter. I am so naive or was naive at times with technology, and as I have, my oldest is 8, and I was on Twitter the other day and was looking for a few things, and was just surprised at some of the things that I was seeing on Twitter. And I didn't realize that I should know. You'd think that at this point I would know that porn is everywhere, that I will always be able to find porn if I wanted to find it. But it reminds me of the story when I first got the internet years ago. One of my friends was telling me that he was struggling with looking at online porn, And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you don't know that there's porn online? I mean, this was like, I had probably just gotten an email address, so I had no idea what was going on. He said, just type the word sex into, your search engine or whatever. And so I was quite surprised. But it's so pervasive. And you think about, how do we raise kids right now to not be overly and prematurely sexualized? In some ways, I guess it's good that they're not going to find a magazine in the house, but they're all given tablets and phones now, and they're going to, unless a parent has some sort of lock on their search functions, kids are going to find those things. And it's going to, I think we're going to continue to see what are the results of this ubiquitous availability of porn for particularly for younger people right now.
Yeah. And I mean, the counter argument for some folks is, this is freedom of speech or choice, or, if I'm electively doing this or whatever. So I'm not really talking about, that aspect of it. And by no means, would I be anybody who would ever kink shame anybody or anything like that, because, it's all about, to me, agency, consent, and safety in terms of what people are really electing to engage in. And in terms of that, I think that, that's a separate conversation, which I hold space for. But in terms of the way in which this objectification or this punitive nature or this way of conditioning the mind in a way that is actually trying to destroy, in many respects, another human being, because this human being has been so objectified, I think that necessarily has real long-term repercussions for folks, for men and for women.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. When young people are just seeing women in particular roles, and that is the role of satisfying a man or multiple men, that's going to impact their relationships. It can't not impact those relationships.
So one of the things that's come up a lot is when you take something away that's not so helpful, if you don't replace it with something that is helpful, then what is not so helpful may either change from something that's also not helpful, like people who quit drinking, who eat, or who smoke, and then who gamble, or, whatever. So what would be the replacement for this kind of stuff? If you're not going to be this bro that hangs out with the, frat guys and objectifies people and watches porn and whatever, this is me generalizing, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not going to be like on that side of it, if you want to be a more engaged, full-bodied human that happens to be in a male body with this full range of emotions and access to what otherwise is sometimes vulnerability and intimacy, and sometimes is real character and strength and whatever, like you do whatever it is that's needed to be done at the time. There's not just this rigidity of, I am the one who never asked for directions. It's like, yeah, well, sometimes I might have to. Yeah. How do we shift? What do we replace it with?
We replace it with joy, really. We replace it with joy, and we replace it with a lot of love in our relationships. That we'll find that this opens up all of this space for these great relationships and this joy that we have. I talk about one of the things that has to happen for men to become who they really want to be and who they want to be, and one of those is purpose. When you set aside, some of these addictions, you set aside some an openness to think through these things. You also open up yourself to thinking more seriously about, what am I here for? How can I make a difference? What can I do to make the world better? And when you're living outside of just your day-to-day, what's in it for me kind of thing, I'm gonna view porn right now, or I'm gonna spend the next 2 hours just watching whatever's on Netflix, and you think about what's going on in my community. How can I give? What can I do for my neighbor? Maybe I'm just going for a bike ride. What am I doing for myself to reinvigorate me? Maybe I'm spending some time meditating. There's tons of things out there for us that bring incredible joy and love and happiness into our lives that replace these things. So
yeah, so you're not missing it. You're
not missing anything. I mean, you have to, as I get older, I think about the things that serve me. And one of the things that last year I didn't drink for 8 months because I was trying to understand the relationship for me between the depression I experienced and alcohol. I realized that I was drinking more during the times when I was going through a depression, and that was making it worse. And so I was testing out, could I recognize when I was in it, okay, I'm depressed, don't drink. And so I went 8 months. It was, I learned other things that I could enjoy to drink. And I learned that I didn't, need the feeling of waking up exhausted and tired. And so there are all kinds of things, I think, and it changes depending upon where we're at in our lives. Some things might serve us. Some friends might be great friends at one point in our life, and then at another point in our life, they could be destructive to us and helpful to us.
Loyalty, and I feel like a lot of men get stuck on that word and that concept, and even some women. But can you speak to that? Of sometimes it's like maybe necessary to let certain relationships go.
Well, I like to think of it, and I think I said it in that way, is what serves who you want to be. And any aspect of our lives that doesn't serve who we want to be, we need to seriously think about removing and eliminating, whether that's a habit, whether that's alcohol, TV, whether it's movies we watch, music we listen to. And yeah, it can be difficult to do. We develop habits. It might feel comfortable having that person in your life, but that person, every time you're around them, is negative and putting you down, or just seems to hate life, and everything is awful. And it doesn't mean that you can't still love that person and support them, but you can change the amount of time or the kind of structure of that relationship, so that it's more effective for helping you become the person that you want to be. We should be doing those kinds of evaluations about everything in our life on a regular basis.
I love it. Well, we're almost out of time. I am going to really briefly just show folks that this is the magazine here. If I can do it.
That it really exists. There actually is a magazine.
Yes, that it really exists, that there is a magazine. So I'm just going to share my screen really briefly.
Okay.
Right here, if I can do it. I don't know. Can you see it or no?
I cannot see it.
You cannot see it. I don't know if I'll put it up on the website, because I think it's going to be a little bit too much of a challenge for me right here. Oh, this one. There we go.
I see this. Yes.
There we go. So that's it. And really, it's a nice magazine. It's a beautiful, glossy print, actual magazine that you can pick up, but you also, of course, have it digitally and stuff. So I think that's a really nice way we can do things nowadays. We're not just with the magazine, but we're also, we have both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so looking forward to I'm going to stop that and come back to us. That was just a little sneak peek. What are the best ways for people to find you?
Stand-magazine.com is the best way. We're on all social at Stand Magazine 1 on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And people can reach me at Dwayne at stand-magazine.com as well.
It's dash, meaning hyphen.
Hyphen.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure
Yeah.
No, that's great. And Dwayne, I really want to just say thank you, and how much I appreciate your time here on Wise Girl today, but also just for, trying to step into the space and step up in the way that you can, be based on your skill set and, your willingness to share your own story, because I really think that oftentimes that is what gives other people their permission to start touching into their own and then start doing this work. And it's kind of slow sometimes, or it can be a little bit challenging, but that they don't have to do it alone. And your magazine is really, I think, a community and a way for people to start having these conversations more communally.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. I appreciate that. I don't see how I can ask other people to talk openly and honestly about what manhood and masculinity means if I'm not able to do it myself, or if I'm unwilling to do it. So unfortunately, I also have to, what feels unfortunate to me at times is that I have to share some sometimes difficult stories about myself and my life and my own struggles. But it's been very rewarding.
And that's just it. The joy comes out of that, right? They say, Leonard Cohen, the crack is where the light gets in. And so there you have it. Thank you so much, Dwayne. That's it.
Thank you, Francesca.
Edition of Wise Girl. I really appreciate it. Have a great day and good luck with the magazine.
Thank you.
Take care.